I think among all the companies that I've come close to, and this also includes companies that my close friends have worked at, which means that I know what goes on there and so on. After English, my first language from Hindi to Punjabi because I like Punjabi more.
Okay. And maybe
I
OB
think,
must have been like literature for you a little bit, I think.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I should say this here, but in IITs, humanities courses are called hukka. And the other sort of thing that was peddled during campus placement at that time was that you will use a lot of high funda mathematics. And I think the other thing that very related to this is that with regulations, I always think of it as, I think the speed of innovation, the speed at which you can actually understand customer needs and so on also becomes better.
Today's episode, we joined Movin Jain, founder of the cross-border Fintech Skydo. Having saved more than INR 10 crores in fees for MSMEs, Skydo is making international payments easier, faster, and cheaper. Join us as we talk about Movin's journey from finance at Barclays, where he would look at fixed income debt in Europe, to product at PhonePe, and then starting up the second time at Skydo. Welcome to the podcast, Movin.
Thanks, Aviral. Glad to be here.
Mohin, we'll start with a few rapid fire fun questions. If you could be a professional in any other field unrelated to what you do today, what would it be and why?
I think I would love to be a automobile engineer. I'm quite fascinated by how cars work and, in fact, also how planes work. So I'd love to build them.
Oh, fascinating. And like, when did this start? The fascination, or
I think I had a pretty interesting physics teacher during JE times. His name is
okay,
Arvind Chauhan. I'm still in touch with him. He had a very, very different way of teaching. He used to try to practically do everything that he was teaching. So if he was teaching
oh,
us rotational kinetics, then he would actually bring like a bicycle or something and actually perform whatever he was teaching. So I think I fell in love with physics at that time and also did well in JE because of that. I think since then I've had I would say, a strong attraction towards physics, particularly the mathematical side of physics.
hmm, nice.
And on that note, do you have a favorite car brand that you can tell us about?
Yes, Tesla, hands down.
Nice.
So I
Classic.
booked a Tesla Model 3. Unfortunately, in India, it's still not there, but I booked it like, I guess, almost a decade back now.
Okay.
I've been waiting for it. I don't know when it will be here. In fact, the day I booked it, I couldn't afford it. So I just did like a rough calculation of what it might cost in India. Thankfully, now I can, but I don't. It's still not here.
Does that change your view about Tesla as a brand, or are you still very much in love with it?
I'm still very much in love with it. I'm also pretty much an Elon Musk fanboy,
Hmm.
although I know that that breed has reduced over the years. But
Well, you can't
I
say it. Probably has changed in composition, I would say.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know which one leads to the other, but I do love Tesla and their products. I have, whenever I go to the US or Canada or outside India, I admire their cars and have had a few rides. So I think they've just
Nice.
really thought about the whole experience of riding a car very, very differently.
What's the last book that impacted you deeply?
So I'm not happy about the fact that I don't read a lot, but
Okay.
there are a few books that I've read, and some of them have really impacted me. I think the hard thing about hard things is
Hmm.
definitely on top. And the reason is it basically, so when I read it, I had already moved out of my first startup. And
Okay.
I was thinking that at some point I'll start up again. I think what above everything else, that it made me think is that such a rock star founder who's actually built such an amazing business has also gone through a lot of very, very basic and stupid hardships.
Hmm.
So, which means I'm not any different, and it's not like I'm screwing up something very basic and I can't do this again. So that actually gave me a lot of confidence that everybody's challenges are actually pretty similar.
So, a good insight.
What's a startup that you admire apart from Tesla or
I
Elon Musk
really
startup?
admire PhonePe. So I worked there for a couple of years and really loved my time there. I think And as I was working at different companies, so after I moved out of my previous startup, I worked at 3 different companies. And even before my first startup, I had worked with 2 companies. So I think among all the companies that I've come close to, and this also includes companies that my close friends have worked at, which means that I know what goes on there and so on. I think PhonePe is by a fat margin the one company that I'd like to emulate as a founder.
And as a founder, you have to build culture. So, what's your favorite hiring question?
So I like to ask people what frustrates you the most at
Hmm.
work, and I
Good.
get pretty interesting answers, and it also helps kind of cool off the conversation a bit and move it into the slightly casual space. People do open up quite a bit. I generally tend to keep the environment light in interviews.
Hmm.
My math questions can sometimes get a bit stressful, but I try to cool it down with such questions. And people do share quite a bit, and that helps me learn about their personality. And I think that helps evaluate a culture fit.
What's the most recurrent answer or the most interesting answer you've got?
I think people get frustrated at all sorts of small things. For example, if somebody just doesn't meet deadlines, they get frustrated. If
Hmm.
somebody doesn't answer their emails, they get frustrated, and so on, right? So, and then it doesn't stop there. So, if somebody says one of these things, then I would typically say, why does this annoy you? Or
Hmm.
what's the worst thing you've done once this happened?
Hmm.
And so on. So, that just helps me understand 2 things. One, how they manage their temper,
Hmm.
and two, how open they are to sharing their weaknesses or their sort of the bad side of things.
What's one truth that few people agree with you on?
I think as a founder, I think maybe a lot of founders will say this, but I feel that first principle thinking is underrated, and most people don't do it. And most people actually think that it's useless and try to do the opposite. I think I've always used first principles thinking, and wherever I've not used it, I've actually suffered. So I think first principles thinking above everything else, that's the belief I have, which I feel most people don't.
Awesome. Movin, would love to talk about your journey up to college, then IIT, then IIM Ahmedabad, Barclays, the experience there. Growing up, any influences that you had? Did you think you wanted to be an entrepreneur? When did that happen? And I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but this is just up to Skydo.
I think 2, 3 things happened as I was growing up. One was academic success came almost quite easy. For the first few years, I felt like it was too hard for me to excel in academics, and everybody around me was smart and so on. And then at some point, I think something shifted as the subjects became more mathematical and more sort of about what do I say, science and so on, and less say things like literature and so on. By the way, the worst subject for me during my class 10th boards was Hindi. I remember asking my mom if I could switch my first language. After English, my first language from Hindi to Punjabi because I like Punjabi more.
Okay.
So she said no because she thought that people who talk in Punjabi seem like they're abusing others. So although they speak Punjabi at home all the time. So
It's a very nice language, though. I thought. I mean, it's
I do
gregarious.
agree.
It's
I do
gregarious.
agree as well.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, yeah, academic success at some point then started coming easy, and I kind of, it almost became too good to be true, and I had to sort of at some point get a reality check. So I
Hmm.
think after getting into, actually, one more incident that I just remembered. So my dad went to this engineering college called Tech, Punjab
Yes,
Engineering
of
College,
course.
and I used to love their old students meet. So it used to happen every year, and I used to accompany my dad with a lot of excitement because I used to meet people like Jaspal Bhatti there. I was a big fan of him, and even Kalpana Chawla at times. So he was standing with a group of his friends, and they were all asking him about me. Your son is now an adult, and he will very soon be going into college. So what are you thinking? So my dad just said, as a matter of fact, even though he had never spoken to me about it, uh, in fact, so my friends were asking, will your son actually come to PEC and would you want him to come to PEC? He said, "Ye to IIT jayega." And I hadn't even heard what IIT is, and I had never spoken to dad about it. But at that point, it was suddenly a shock for me. And then suddenly, there was no Google at that time, but I had to basically figure out over time what this IIT is, and how can I go there and so on. And it was pretty unbelievable that it can actually happen. Um, so that's when I first started thinking that, okay, maybe there is something called IIT which I should think about and seriously work for. Over the next few years, of course, did a lot of hard work towards it, and luckily it worked out. But I think after moving from IIT to IIM is when I first realized that being smart is not enough. You actually have to be able to carry your smartness with a cool attitude towards your work and not take your work too seriously
Correct.
and not take yourself too seriously. So I think that was one thing that I learned at IMA, and also how to celebrate, how to have fun while doing it all. This is a learning that I've also, I would say, strengthened over the years, even after IMA. Um, and I think after IM, I was still pretty geeky and still, thought that mathematics could alone change the world and so on. But I think over time, I've learned a few other skills, and some of those courses that during MBA, like organizational behavior and so on, which at that point I could just make no sense of, and also hence scored very low, have over time started becoming very, very, clear realities, and I've started actually imbibing a lot of those.
That's awesome. You've actually put your MBA to use. I always keep sort of ranting and complaining that most people treat IMI as a placement agency where you can learn so much. Especially if you're a founder, I think the variety of things you're taught, ops, finance, human capital, everything. I think it's very useful. And maybe
I
OB
think
must have been like literature for you a little bit, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I should say this here, but in IITs, humanities courses are called hookah,
Okay.
because basically they say that you can just sit in the class and smoke hookah and nothing will happen, and you don't need to listen to what the teacher is saying and so on. So, but it couldn't be more wrong, of course, in
Yeah.
hindsight. But at that point, this is what I strongly believed. And when I went to IIM, it was basically all these OB type of courses were all repetition of hookah, and hence I was
Okay.
like, oh shit, now I got this again. And
Yeah.
you know
Moroka.
and IIM is actually very, very competitive in the sense
Yes.
that there are people from all sorts of backgrounds, so it's not just engineers. And a lot of people, particularly from non-engineering backgrounds, from Delhi University and other places, are really, really smart, and they understand these subjects really well, right?
Hmm.
And they've studied these subjects in the past as well. And then you have people who've even engineers who've had work experience before coming to MBA, so they can actually appreciate those subjects because they've lived those experiences in the past.
Correct.
For me, none of that was true. I went into MBA a fresher, so for me it was really a struggle to even pass some of these courses.
Hmm. Yeah, same for me. I mean, I, on the other hand, enjoy literature a lot, so I like these courses a lot more. I think if someone asked me what other profession I could have done, it could have been writing, which I'm doing anyway. But
Very interesting.
that could have been an interesting full time job for me. And you've done signal processing, finance, and commerce, like such a variety of things. Talk us through that. How did you get into Barclays? It was obviously one of the most lucrative and sought after jobs at IMA. Why did you choose that, and then how did you switch from there onwards?
I think the choice of Barclays and broadly investment banking and capital markets was mostly based on how glamorous that role looked while doing MBA or while doing undergrad. And it was not a great market when I graduated
Right.
2009 at IIT and 2011 at IIM. So there were very few such jobs available. So I think just getting one of them was a big achievement, or so
In
I thought
itself.
at that time.
Hmm.
And the other sort of thing that was peddled during campus placement at that time was that you will use a lot of high funda mathematics in investment banks and capital markets, which could not be farther from the
Father from
truth.
the truth.
And that's what I learned after a few months of working there.
Yeah.
And I don't think this has anything to do with a particular bank or a
Yeah.
particular
It's
team. I
it's
think
more
it's just
like
true in
OB,
general.
I guess. It's more
Yeah,
like OB in the bank
yeah.
also.
So that's when I realized, okay, this is actually my job is actually just to sell and to keep my clients
Correct.
happy. And for that, I don't really need, the kind of academic background I have. This was also one of the triggers for me to think about, is it really for me? Or should I do
Mm.
something else? But I think on this, I'll probably touch again at a later point in my career, which is very recently, where I realized that sales is actually a necessity of life. It's a reality, and I just have to embrace it. At that point, I was running away from it, but at some
Mm.
point, even after coming into the startup world and building technology products and being in product management and engineering, I still had to embrace sales, and that has actually led to a lot of revelations and, to some extent, I would say, a lot of success on its own. The moment I embraced it. But at that point, did think that sales is not my piece of cake, and neither am I good at it, nor do I enjoy it. And there are so many people who can do it better than me. Let me find what I can do better than others. So that's how my thinking went when I was at Barclays. And meanwhile, a lot of startups in India were starting to do well. So somebody referred me to InMobi, and I got in. And I wanted to come back to India because I felt like the environment in London didn't really support any other career paths than investment banking and markets. Now I think London is a much bigger tech hub. At that point, that was not the
Mm.
case. So I think it was a great decision to actually move back to India and do this. I think the other thing that it gave me was the ability to experiment with my life, because
Mm.
cost of living here being so low, it was possible to not even be earning something and just quit your job and start up and so on. I think had I continued in London, it would have been very difficult, and I would have continued to be risk averse, plus with all the immigration challenges and so on.
Of course.
So so I think after 2 years at InMobi, and after having seen the InMobi founders up close and being so inspired by them, I felt ye to main bhi kar sakta hu. Let me do something of my own. And luckily things worked out. A very close friend from IMA had a startup idea, and he wanted to start up along with me, so we started together. Of course, over time had a lot of ups and downs, but that's how I got into starting up.
And talk us through a little bit about your first startup. What was the idea? When did you do it? Why did you think it would be a large outcome?
So the idea that we had after a few small iterations was, let's build a photo app, a social media platform, basically, where people don't follow each other, people don't follow people, people follow topics. So it was a different spin on social networks. So if you and I both follow bikes, let's say, then we could actually get to know each other through our common interest and discuss, which are our favorite bikes and so on. So that was, I mean, this is in short what the idea was. But as we built it, painstakingly over a year and a half, and launched it, and realized that even our own closest friends, and even some photographers and so on, who are basically really looking for such stuff all the time, are also not really getting retained on the app, and after a point they're dropping off. The hard realization was that we actually didn't even think about which customer or which user are we solving a problem for, and what is the problem we are solving. So we really struggled with this question. I mean, a lot of investors would ask us this question and we would be blank, but at that point we thought that we are the innovators, and these people don't get it. But at some point that realization dawned on us that we should have actually just started with a problem instead of starting with a solution. And obviously then we didn't have PMF, so in about a year and a half we had to pivot, and then we became a B2B marketplace for social media influencers, to be discovered by brands, and then for brands to run those campaigns and so on. Became profitable very quickly, but I started realizing that that business is very hard to scale. And so about a year later, I moved out and decided to pursue other opportunities. The person I started it with, Rahul, he continues to run that company, and pretty successfully.
So walk us through the next steps of that. So you tried this first startup, you realized it was not going to scale. What happened? You decided to part ways. What was your
Yeah,
journey? How did you figure out what you're doing next?
I think it was not easy, by the way, to move out of my first startup as well. And yeah, this was the first time I had built something of my own, and I also wanted to be fair to Rahul. But at the same time, I realized that if my heart is not in it, then I'm also not being, true to him by continuing here. So it took me about 6 to 9 months of discussions with him, and also a lot of internal sort of debate to figure out what I should do, and eventually decided to move out. I think, thankfully, the angel investors we had, one of them being Raghu, who now runs Zolve, and at that point had recently exited from Taxi for sure. He was a great advisor to us, and continues to be even now. He, one of the things that he said, which really helped me sort of make my decision, was you have to think about yourself, and you have to really, at every point, do what's best for you. If you just keep doing things for others, then at some point you're going to be unfair to them. So that helped me move on. And then I think at that point, the main thing I was optimizing for was mentorship, because as a founder, you're on your own and you don't really have somebody to guide you all the time. So I found a great mentor in a person called Psyche, who now runs X to 10X Technologies. So he hired me at Ola. So I worked for about a year at Ola. At that point, I found a great opportunity in Meesho, so I moved on to Meesho. So Meesho was really going through a phase of very, very solid growth at that point. We were about 100 people when I joined, and by the time I left, we were about 1,000 people. So spent about 2 years at Meesho, as one of the product leaders, and I had a lot of fun, a lot of challenges as well. I learned a lot, about how to build a company. This was obviously a very different company from Gallery 5, which was my first startup. And also, the founders had a very, very different personality than me. So that helped me sort of learn, how different types of people run companies, and what to do, what not to do, and so on. And then I think by the
I mean,
time
before we move on, I
sorry.
would love to double click on that. What were some of the things that you learned? Can you walk us through like the contrasting, your style as a founder, PhonePe, and you're close to that team, and then Meesho. What were some of the
Yeah,
differences? What did you pick up?
I think some of the things that I learned during Meesho and PhonePe particularly were, I think at Meesho we were always slightly ahead, or a few months ahead of competition. So the social commerce space was really hot when I was at Meesho, and several startups were building in it. There were, every few months, each of them was raising the next round, and so on. And so we had a few fierce competitors. I think the one thing that worked well for Meesho is that we really understood our customers well, and then kept building stuff that they would need. Now, this is what I tell to my product team today as well, that at every point we were building, like, let's say, 5 features, and we would ship each of them, over the next few months. Now, our competitors would eventually copy the features that worked the best. That was happening. But then that doesn't mean we would lose out, because each of those, it's not like all of those 5 features are going to work well. One of them is going to turn out to be a rock star. Everybody outside Meesho, in fact inside Meesho as well, doesn't know which ones. As long as broadly we understand our customers needs and are doing the right thing for them, we know that one of those 5 or two of those 5 will really take us to the next level. So with every such thing, we basically give ourselves a few months of head start, because it takes time for your competitors to understand which of these 5 features that you release today works really well. And only once they understand that can they copy it. Otherwise, I mean, if they copy everything, then they'll basically be quite behind you. So so that actually gives you the head start. It's not not letting them copy anything. It's okay, they will copy stuff, but just building it first is what gives you the head start, and that actually compounds over time. So over time, this gap of how much Meesho's user base was versus other competitors kept widening, because of this head start that we kept giving ourselves. And of course, there are a bunch of other things that went well. For example, in the go to market also, I think we really did well. But this is one of the things that worked out well on the product side, and I learned a lot from that, being a key part of that team. I think one of the key things I learned at PhonePe was how to hire and maintain diversity in a team. PhonePe is now a pretty large company. I think when I joined, there were more than 1,000 people already. At this point, there are probably a few thousand. And they've done really well in terms of market share, in terms of funding, in terms of user base growth, and so on. And I think even in terms of extending the product and covering more and more use cases. I think so this is one of the things that has worked well for them. That, I mean, I'd never seen in my life people with 10 to 15 years of age difference working at the same level. It was something that my mind just couldn't accept before joining PhonePe. But and I found it really weird when I was joining them. But after I joined, I realized that there is a way to actually make it work, and there is a way to just ignore all of these differences and bring people together and create a melting pot of different mindsets, different personalities, different age groups, and so on. And that actually helps you create a team that can challenge each other. So I think PhonePe did this really well, and it's one of the things that I want to emulate. I think the other thing that PhonePe did well was in a fintech product, particularly something that people use every day. Um, you need to care about muscle memory. So while you need to innovate, you need to keep launching new things. You also need to make sure that the person who was using your app yesterday understands where to click today. Like if you ask me to pay you using Google Pay today, I'm obviously a frequent PhonePe user and make most of my UPI payments through that. So if you ask me to use Google Pay while it is on my phone, I will fumble. I will not be able to make that payment, within the 30 seconds that I can manage on PhonePe. I'll probably take like forex of that time. So, and if you're doing something every day, something as utility as payments, then muscle memory matters. And that's one of the things that I think PhonePe understood really well and
That's
worked out
very interesting.
really well for them.
Yeah, really good insights. I mean, it kind of, you saw these gaps in your first startup, you saw it couldn't scale, you saw how people scaled, and then tell us, the next step. How did you come up with the idea for Skydo? How did you build up conviction to go out and do it?
So I think the kida of starting up again was always there inside me after after Gallery 5, because in Gallery 5 I had made such a bunch of obvious mistakes in hindsight that I was raring to use those learnings and start again. But I also wanted to recharge my batteries for a few years. So I think all of those about 5, 6 odd years that I worked in other companies were really useful, and each of those stints taught me something. Now, while my time at PhonePe was going well, and I was loving what I was doing, and I was loving the company I was working for, I also started realizing that I now need to change my trajectory and give myself an even bigger challenge. The market for starting up was also really great in 2022. The VC sentiment was at an all-time high, and so on. So that was also a good opportunity. And coincidentally, my close friend Srivatsan, who was also my manager at Ola, he and I were just chatting and exchanging notes as part of our regular friendly catch-ups. And it came out that both of us at some point wanted to start up. Both of us wanted to do fintech, B2B. So there was just a huge overlap of all the boundaries that we had drawn for ourselves as entrepreneurs. And I think he had been on his own journey after Ola. He had been in Rupeek. So he got introduced to fintech. After Ola, went to Meesho and then PhonePe. So again, I got introduced to fintech. So so such an overlap between our thinking, I think, led us to believe that maybe we could start up. So we spent the next few months, just brainstorming on weekends and just figuring out if this could be real. Uh, by the time we resigned from our respective jobs, we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we knew that it's a great idea to start up together. So, so that was the kind of conviction we reached with respect to having each other as a co-founder. And I think that is really important. And according to me, if you have a great co-founder, you can chance upon the right idea eventually. So that's how we did it. Give ourselves about 6 months to decide what we are going to eventually do. And I think the trigger for cross-border payments just came from, I loved payments. Having worked in PhonePe, I thought that this is something I can now do. And it's a tough business. It's not something everybody can do. So there's a unique edge. Plus, I think his background, so among many other things, he's run his family's business, which is in manufacturing and exports, for about 7 years. And that made him very familiar with exports and with cross-border trade. So a lot of the challenges that he faced as a small business owner were some things that we looked deeply at and combined it with my interest in payments, and that kind of triggered the thought that we could probably build a cross-border payments company. And then, of course, did a bunch of top-down research and so on, and then a few other stars aligned, and that made us decide that we could build a cross-border payments company.
Maybe tell us what exactly is the problem that you were solving, right? This was something that you didn't do the first time around. What was the target audience, and what was the specific pain point that you were trying to address?
So we are at this point helping Indian small businesses, particularly those who are selling services abroad, and even Indian freelancers who are working for an overseas company, to get paid, essentially. And the challenges that these people usually face are, the typical channel for these people to get paid has been banks. When we think of cross-border payments, we think of Stripe, PayPal, even Razorpay. But the major focus of those companies have always been on B2C merchants, not, and whereas what I'm talking about here is B2B, where you're serving a business, not really serving a consumer. So if you're selling $100 t-shirt to an American resident, um, you can use PayPal or Razorpay on your website. They'll add to cart, checkout, and pay via those payment gateways. But when you're getting paid, let's say $5,000 per month for the services that you're providing to somebody, let's say you're a marketing agency, you can't use those payment gateways, and it's a very, very different flow. You raise an invoice, you get paid, and you already trust your customer, and your customer trusts you. It's not that the customer just comes to your website, buys something, and leaves. So for that, the solution has always been banks. There are a few companies who are in this space for a few years, but the penetration of those companies is still very low. So more than 90% of the market share belongs to banks. And banks are typically very human focused in terms of their service model. So there's relationship managers, there are branches. You have to sometimes visit those branches. You have to talk to the relationship manager on WhatsApp, email, phone, and so on. And their model is not very digital. So whereas these entrepreneurs are running digital businesses, so they don't want to. I mean, for example, I don't want to ever go to a bank branch. I dread going to a bank branch, even though it might take very little time. But that's just how our mindset is. So that's what these people wanted, and we thought, why not provide that to them for cross-border payments, which is the lifeline of their business because they're basically exporters. So yeah, that's the problem we are solving, giving them all of the convenience that they need for cross-border payments in a digital platform, so that they don't have to depend on a human being coming to office on time, getting stuff done on time, and so on. And they don't have to ever visit a bank branch and so on. Can just get it done from their laptop or from their phone, and can get visibility on everything. Don't have to negotiate prices. Don't have to second guess or trust a human being, and so on.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But wanted to ask, how are you able to ensure lower fees and faster payments, not just than banks, because banks have this human component, but even then compared to some fintech. So how do you guys do that? And if you give us some
So I
insights.
think cross-border payments is generally a pretty healthy unit economics business, and more from a gross margin perspective. So it's a high gross margin business usually, and so making margin is not the problem. The problem is
Why is
always
that so,
CAC. And
Movin?
so
Why is that so?
yeah,
The
so the reason
margin.
for that is, if you look at India's exports, majority exports go to developed countries like US, UK, Europe, Canada, and so on. Now, even if you look at US, dollar versus rupee is a very, very liquid currency pair. I'll not go into the reasons behind that, but it's a very liquid currency pair. If you ask any banker, the spreads will be in basis points, which means that the cost of converting currency is actually not that much. So why does a
Right.
bank charge 2 to 3% or more on FX? All of that is gross margin, right? And
Oh,
it's actually going to pay the relationship manager's salary or the branch rent, right?
very
So it's a
interesting.
very high gross margin business, and which means the game here is mainly in fixed cost and CAC. And for banks, of course, CAC is very low because they provide a bunch of services, so they're not particularly acquiring somebody for cross-border payments. Fixed costs are, of course, high. Now, so compared to other fintechs, just to answer your question, I think that's what we are trying to do better, which is keep our fixed costs very low One, by just making the right strategic decisions and not wasting our time solving problems that customers don't need us to solve. Focusing on a very specific customer segment, at least as a small company, we can do that. Eventually, we will have to focus on wider segments as well. But today, we are just razor focused on very sharply defined customer segments. So we've kept our fixed costs pretty low, and it also helps us keep our CAC pretty low because we know where our customers are, how to get them, how to scale our growth initiatives in just that segment.
In talking about growth, you're currently serving, I believe it's 2,500 businesses. You're acquiring about 500 per month, which is crazy. How are you maintaining that kind of growth rate?
I think couple of things. One is just related to what I said before, which is knowing our customers well is helping us figure out where to meet them or where to get them into the top of our funnel. So even when we run ads on different social media platforms, uh, this understanding of our customers actually helps us figure out how to run those ads or what that journey should be after somebody clicks the ad. I think given all of these platforms now have very good AI algorithms, if you really know your customers well, you can use that AI to your advantage to reduce your CAC. I think that's one thing that has worked well. I would say it's still early stage, so we can't really declare victory yet. But the other thing I think is just having a good, motivated team in place who thinks first principles.
And just kind of double clicking on that, you said when you just left college, your first job at Barclays, you thought sales was not for you, and that's changed. So how did you make that change, first of all? Because don't think that's easy if it doesn't come naturally. What are some of the things that you've done to become good at sales? And obviously, you are now.
I think a couple of things happened. So when I was at PhonePe, I was leading a decently large product team, and I realized that I've already built enough products. So building more products is not really going to be the challenge for me, and I won't really be happy with myself if that's all I do at PhonePe. So let me now try to become a little more hands off and try to let other people in my team do that while I take on more of a evangelism role. Right now, there were many things in PhonePe which went well, which enabled me to do this, including first of all having a good team, and over time being able to hire really amazing people, and to an environment that didn't really need me to go very deep into everything and say, if for example there are companies where if the leader doesn't know the minutest detail of everything in the first meeting with the CEO, then they're not right for the role, right? uh, so they gave space to me for actually growing out of just the ground level details and being able to do think bigger or think at a strategic level. I think that's the first time I realized that actually, even as a product leader, I can do sales, I can actually evangelize. So I spent a lot of time with stakeholders at PhonePe. I used to have, no agenda meetings with all my stakeholders very regularly. We would sometimes, like, they would be telling me which color car they bought and so on as well. So that was the level of no agenda discussions we would have with each other. And it's not that these discussions were useless, right? Of course, they keep the environment light and help you connect with each other on a slightly more casual level, but it also helps you become approachable to people. It helps you convince them a little more easily because you know what they care about, and so on. So that's, I would say, one of the early signs I started seeing, or early successes I started seeing in shifting my focus more towards evangelism and sales. Um, Before that, every time I tried doing something like this, either I didn't have the support system to be able to do it, or I didn't do a great job of it. Right. So every time I basically never saw success from this. But this is the first time I saw it. And then obviously as a founder now, it's probably more than 50% of my job. To hire, you have to sell. To launch a product, you have to sell. To raise funds, you have to sell, and so on, right? So at this point, it's I would say mostly second nature, and I'm still learning. But yeah, this was my transition from just being a, I would say, a geeky product and tech person to over time starting to think of myself as also a salesperson.
No, that's quite insightful, and I think a good lesson for everyone out there. All those product people who love to build stuff and don't like to sell. So you've applied for an RBI license to get your own payment license for Skydo. Can you walk us through what you think this is going to do for the company and what's the rationale behind applying?
Yeah, I think we are actually pretty happy that our space is getting more deeply regulated now and becoming a very serious space for the regulator. I think one thing that we enjoy in India is that our regulator is enjoys very high trust among customers. So the moment Skydo is RBI regulated, it becomes easy for us to win our customers' trust because the moment they see our name on RBI website or know that RBI has actually given us an authorization to do this business, I think it becomes automatic that they can trust us. So that's one key advantage. The same I would say impact is going to happen even with, so given the business we are in, we have to partner with a lot of overseas banks or fintechs. Um, so even in winning their trust, I think if the Indian regulator has already placed its trust in us, that helps us, partner with those overseas banks and fintechs more easily. So I think that's one key advantage of this license.
Makes sense. And I'm talking about regulation. It is a very regulated sector. Uh, what is maybe some advice for aspiring fintech founders about how to navigate some of the regulatory hurdles building in the fintech space?
I think I recently heard something, an amazing articulation of how to deal with regulation, and I really, agree with it. There is innovation, and then there is arbitrage in regulation. So, whatever you want to do, it may not fully be allowed by regulation today, or it may not be addressed by regulation today. So, regulation might be silent about it. Now you have to discern between what out of this is innovation, which means you're truly helping the economy, you're helping the customers, you're helping the country achieve its objectives, versus where do you see just an arbitrage opportunity. The regulator has not thought about this, let me actually get in and take advantage of this loophole. So the second category is where you are taking a lot of regulatory risk, and eventually the regulator will catch up. And I
Hmm.
mean, RBI is the smartest of regulators that I've seen so far, so they do catch up eventually. It takes time because obviously entrepreneurs will always be ahead of regulators in terms of thinking of new ideas. So I think as an entrepreneur, being able to discern between what is innovation and what is arbitrage is really important. And that's the key thing that we keep thinking about at Skydo. Is this innovation or is this arbitrage? If this is innovation, let's do it. If this is arbitrage, then no point in doing this in the short term and later getting screwed.
Very interesting. It's a good lens.
And I think the other thing that very related to this is that with regulations, I always think of it as uh, where the puck is versus where the puck is going. I think it's always the latter that you should think about. Today, the regulator might be saying something, but if you just look at, if you just basically take the d by dx of what the regulator has been saying over the last d by dt of what the regulator has been saying over the last few years or months, you can basically realize where their thinking is going and what they eventually want to achieve. They have a roadmap, but they can't do everything today. So I think to some extent it helps to figure out what their roadmap might be, and our regulator is actually pretty open to talk as well, so you can just ask them, right? A lot of this is not even secret, so that helps you sort of figure out where the puck is going and build accordingly. That's always my and Skydo's attempt.
Uh, so we've seen fintechs evolve from being mostly product led to becoming more segment specific, right? Focusing on a specific user base and specific audience. First of all, why do you think that is? And then secondly, what kind of opportunities do you think this opens up?
Why that is, I feel, I think the so having worked at PhonePe, which is a super app and trying to solve for more and more use cases
Yeah,
every
and
day.
more universal, like universal
Exactly.
to specific. Hmm.
Versus my co-founder who's worked at Rupeek, which is very segment specific and very use case specific. and building Skydo, which is again very segment and use case specific. I think there are opportunities where the same people want everything, versus there are opportunities where, for example, the segment that Skydo is building for, they are actually pretty well served in terms of several other needs like payments, like credit, personal credit, for example, or even let's say salary payouts and so on, those kinds of things. So cross-border payments is, if you just include cross-border payments within those things, because it's a pretty complicated business to build by itself, it's very hard for a company that's doing everything to build it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just that much harder. And because cross-border payments is required only by a specific set of user segments, it may not even make a lot of sense for a company that's serving multiple use cases to build this niche use case, because you're only going to be able to sell it to a very small segment, within your entire user base. So I think it makes a lot of sense for niche companies to build it. I think the speed of innovation, the speed at which you can actually understand customer needs and so on, also becomes better. According to me, the Indian regulator also is very, very open to niche companies solving niche use cases, and I mean the number of licenses that they've given out for each of the recent payments authorizations, like payment aggregator and so on, demonstrates this. If they just wanted a few companies to build everything for everyone, then they wouldn't be giving hundreds of licenses. So I do think it's encouraged, and they are just thinking of what are the key building blocks, and then using these building blocks, everybody can build for a different use case. I think I do feel that even UPI has been built with this thinking, even though today we see the largest apps on the UPI ecosystem being super apps. But it is possible to build very niche use cases using UPI as well, and some people are trying it. I think to the second part of your question, which is how does this help us? I think customers have over time become more accepting of point solutions. Skydo is a point solution, right? Now, I think there are countries, at least that's what I've heard about China, that everyone expects WeChat to do everything, uh, VPay to do everything, right? So, whereas in India, I think it's a mix of both. So, while we expect PhonePe, Google Pay to do everything, there are certain niche use cases which I don't think people go to these apps for, right? So, and the hope while building Skydo is that that's going to be the ecosystem going forward as well. So it helps us basically, convince customers that we can do something, some niche thing better than a super app, or better than your bank, which is all again a super app, maybe not digital. Um, while it also helps us convince other stakeholders like the regulator, like other partners, because now they are also thinking of this reality where the same company is not going to do everything. So to the extent that, for example, there is a specific license for cross-border payments now, means that the regulator is also thinking in this way, or is at least open to this possibility.
Right. Fascinating. And it's a good way to think about where to innovate, how you solve this tension between the regulation and what a customer wants. I think the arbitrage versus innovation thing is quite good. There are some companies that are almost historically always just been solving for arbitrage and then moving to the next one. Um, in that context, in the innovation context, what are your plans for the next 5 years, not the next year, obviously? Where do you see Skydo maybe at 2030?
I think we started with the goal to solve cross-border business-to-business payments between businesses in any country. So today we help businesses in India receive money from businesses in the US, UK, Europe, and so on. Over time, we would like this to be any country to any country. So that's the direction in which we want to eventually go. And of course, this will be a multi-year and maybe even a multi-decade journey. And whatever we've done so far is just a very, very small part of that. I think if I look at just next, maybe, I mean, it's also very hard beyond this to for me to say what we want to do in the next 5 years. I think specifically in the next 2 to 3 years, what I am focusing on is, so with our initial offering, with our current product offering, we've reached product market fit. We are seeing early strong growth. Now we want to obviously solidify that and double down on growth. Along with that, we want to maintain and strengthen our risk and compliance and regulatory controls, and also maintain our quality of service. Um, I think the third objective at this point for the next couple of years is going to be expansion. Figure out what are the other opportunities beyond the current business, where Skydo could have a meaningful play, but still aligned with our overall mission of 2030.
Understand. And what is it that you're most excited about from a geography or user segment perspective?
So we've recently started thinking about e-commerce as a segment. So we're going very deep into that, and we've not yet launched anything, but that's one segment we're really excited about, and it's also growing pretty fast in India and globally. The other thing that we are thinking about is geographical expansion. So particularly, corridors like US to India, or UK to India. How can we solve those corridors deeply and do more than what we do today?
Understand. Awesome, Movin. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and some deep insights into fintech. Just to close, and why we call this Founders Unfiltered, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback you received during your journey as a founder that really changed your perspective?
I think this is going to be slightly repetitive because we touched on it earlier, but there is a person I really look up to. I've worked with him at InMobi, and then I met him at a conference a few years back. He was working with Swiggy at that time. His name is Mayank Talati. So he has been an engineering leader at all these organizations. He and I were just chatting, and I was telling him that I just find sales really difficult, and I feel like there are certain companies I've worked at in the past that wanted me to do more sales and build like sell more and build less. And hence now, at this point in my career, I'm thinking of switching to this. So, I mean, when you typically meet somebody like that who's quite wise, and you consider as a mentor, you typically just bounce off your thoughts about your career with them just to get their thoughts, right? So this person, he immediately said to me, "Dude, sales to tujhe karna hi padega.
Mhm.
Stop running away from sales."
Bite the bullet.
And to some
Sure.
extent, this had been my learning, but I had been denying it so far. But I think after he said it, I stopped denying it. I thought, if an engineering leader who is so successful and has done so well, and I look up to him, is saying this, then me, who's not even an engineering person purely, is actually already doing something which has a little more sales than engineering by definition, which is product. If he's telling me this, then who am I to kind of stay in denial? So
Hmm.
that's when my mindset started shifting, and I started thinking a lot about what he said, and over time started realizing that actually it was pretty amazing advice.
Awesome. Movin, thank you so much for sharing so openly and love the chat. Learned a lot about fintech, specifically cross border as well as regulations. I hope our listeners who are aspiring founders or founders learned a lot from this too.
Thank you for having me here, and all the best.